Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 7, Reaching Global Markets. So, Chapter 7 is about looking at the factors that affect marketing in the international arena. So, first we look at the scope and nature of world trade and implications for Canadians. Then we look at some of the major trends that have affected global marketing in recent decades. There's been a decline in economic protectionism, an increase in economic integration across national boundaries. Thirdly, we have increasing global competition by global companies for global customers. And then finally, we have increasing access to the internet for commercial purposes around the world. Okay, then we look at environmental factors that affect global marketing. So we look at cross-cultural diversity, several economic factors, and then we also look at the political climate of countries that we want to expand into. And then we look at 4 different approaches to entering global markets. We can either directly export to foreign markets, we can enter into licensing agreements with companies in foreign markets, and a type of licensing agreement is franchising. We can also enter into joint ventures with partners in a foreign country, and then we can also directly invest in a foreign country. And then finally, we look at various combinations of product promotion strategies that are used in international marketing. Okay, so the first section looks at the scope and nature of international trade and implications for Canada. Oops. Okay, so the value of international trade across national boundaries is about $25 trillion per year, 25 trillion. So that's a lot of money. And we have a list here of the top 10 exporting countries in the world and the top 10 importing countries in the world. And I think this chart is a little bit dated, but so the biggest exporters in the world are China, United States, Germany. So they're each individually exporting in excess of $1 trillion worth of products per year. Canada doesn't show up on that list. And then the world's largest importers by dollar value are United States, China, and Germany. So Americans are importing about $2 trillion worth of goods per year. China and Germany in excess of $1 trillion apiece. Canada doesn't show up on that list either. However, international trade is still important to Canadians, and we'll see this in just a minute. Okay. So usually in trade, when we buy stuff, when you buy a product, we have to fork over the money in the currency of the exporting country. But sometimes countries don't have money, or they don't have a convertible currency. So a convertible currency means a currency that trades in foreign exchange markets. And so sometimes companies or countries, when they engage in international trade, they use so-called counter trade, and a common name for counter trade is barter. So they trade products rather than product for money. So I have some examples of some counter trade examples here. So I have to admit I don't know which years these came from, but a number of years ago, Saudi Arabia wanted to buy some 747 jets from Boeing. Boeing is the large American aircraft manufacturer, and Boeing accepted payment in crude oil instead of dollars. And then Romania wanted to buy They had an electrical generation project worth $150 million, and General Electric provided the equipment, and in return for um, General Electric providing the equipment for the uh, electric generation project, General Electric marketed $150 million worth of Romanian products to markets that Romania didn't have access to. So Venezuela, they wanted to buy some equipment from Caterpillar, the big American, the big yellow equipment manufacturer, and they didn't have any money, so they didn't have enough foreign currency to undertake the transaction, so they traded 350,000 tons of iron ore in return for Caterpillar earth-moving equipment. Okay, and then some other examples, Albania and Russia. Okay, so most countries in the world, they do have convertible currencies. However, there are a couple of countries that don't. They're not very big countries, but North Korea does not have a convertible currency, and apparently in Cuba they have two currencies. They have a national peso, and then they have a kind of an international peso. And the international or the national peso is not convertible in foreign exchange markets. Not convertible doesn't mean that it isn't traded. It just means that when it trades on the black market rather than the regular market. Okay, so the book draws our attention to something called the trade feedback effect. And the trade feedback effect is when we have increases in world trade leading to even larger increases in world trade. And it's because when countries start trading with one another, they obtain the foreign currency of other countries. And once we obtain the currencies of other countries, then we can go ahead and buy imports from those countries. And so this trade feedback effect is an example of a so-called virtuous circle rather than which is the opposite of a vicious circle. Okay, so even though Canada doesn't show up in the top 10 trading countries by dollar value on the list that we see in the book, Canada is still very much a trading country. And Canadian exports are worth about 30% of Canada's GDP. So I have a slide to show that to you. Oops. Okay, so here we have exports as a percentage of GDP. These are G20 countries. So the 20 largest. These are G20 countries, so a group of 20 countries. And Canada, as exports as a percentage of our GDP. GDP, as we'll see in a minute, is the value of all the products produced within a country's boundaries within a 12-month period. And the blue is 2013, and we can see that here's Canada in 2013. Exports were approximately 30% of Canada's GDP, so more than Russia, more than France, China, United States, Brazil, but not as much as South Korea, Germany, Europe, Mexico, la-di-da-di-da. Anyways, 30% of the value of all the products produced in Canada per year, that value is exported. So exporting is obviously a pretty important part of the Canadian economy, even though we're not in the top 10 in dollar terms. Okay. Okay. So when we talk about GDP, I mean we'll talk about this more in macroeconomics class, but GDP stands for gross domestic product, and it stands for total value of all products, so that's goods and services produced within a country's boundaries within a 12-month period. That's different than GNP, gross national product. Gross national product is the value of all the goods and services produced around the world by the companies of a particular country. So Canada's GNP is the value of all the goods and services produced around the world by Canadian companies. But GDP is kind of the more common measure of economic production in a country within a year. So the book talks a little bit about the balance of trade, and I have to admit that this is a marketing book. It's not an economics book, and the definition this book gives for balance of trade isn't exactly correct. The definition that this book provides, it's not of the balance of trade. It's of a component of the balance of trade. As we'll see in macroeconomics, there's three components to the balance of trade. And one is called the current account balance. And the current account balance is the value of exports minus value of imports. And that's what this marketing book calls the balance of trade, but it's not true. Balance of trade has three parts: current account, financial account, and official transactions account. But anyways, we'll get to that in macroeconomics. So, but even when we talk about the current account balance, the current account balance, it's the value of exports minus imports. So the balance can either be a surplus or a deficit, and neither one is inherently more desirable. It may be that current account deficit is actually a more desirable situation to be in if what we're importing is more capital goods rather than consumer goods. Anyways, we'll get back to that in macro. Oops. Are we saw that right? Okay, so we have the question, what explains why a country or its industries are successful or unsuccessful when they engage in international trade? And there's an American professor by the name of Michael Porter, and he developed this little model to help explain why one country's industries or companies are successful or why they fail when they engage in international trade. And there's a little bit of a diagram here in the book. It's called Porter's diamond of national competitive advantage. So if we want to understand why a particular country's industries or companies are successful or not in international trade, we can analyze their degree of success or failure in terms of these four factors, the presence of these four factors. So the first factor is actually called factor conditions, factor number one. So factor number one is a country's ability to convert its resources into an advantage. And sometimes we think that some countries are rich in natural resources, and that's the basis of their international competitiveness. Sometimes countries have high levels of highly educated people, and that's the basis of their success when they go into foreign markets. Or maybe we have good economic infrastructure, we have good highways, we have good railways, we have good airports and shipping ports, and those are the basis of international success. And there's a couple of examples in the book of countries that have capitalized on some of these factor conditions. So there's the example of the Netherlands, which is successful in the international flower market. Flowers that grow and you give to people on Valentine's Day. Why is the Netherlands so successful in the flower market? It's because it's a flat country with lots of water and fertile soil, and they've been able to capitalize on those natural resources. Another example of a country capitalizing on its human resources is Japan. Japan is notoriously poor in natural resources, but it's rich in human resources because it has a highly educated and hardworking people, and they've turn that into an advantage. So I also have a negative example here, and the negative example comes from Canada. Canada as we know, in recent years has been having a lot of difficulty trying to build new pipelines for oil products to get out of the country. Can't get them down to the United States, can't get them through BC. Maybe we can get them down to Eastern Canada, but who knows? So what this means is that the value of oil that Canada sells on international markets is below the world price of oil. And that hurts Canada. We have not been able to capitalize on our natural resource. And how much is that? How much does that cost Canada? Well, of course, we have a bunch of economists in Canada that go out and figure out all this stuff, and they figure the loss to Canada of not selling its oil at the world price is about $50 million per day. So how much is $50 million per day worth? $50 million per day is worth $18.3 billion per year. And so here's economists from CIBC, the bank. So we're losing $50 million a day. This is 2012, so it's obviously a little bit different today. And that equates to $1.3 billion in lost GDP. That's lost economic output for Canada in the amount of $1.3 trillion between 2011 and 2035. And so our government's losing an estimated $250 billion in taxes. Anyways, so Canada just has not been able to take advantage of its factor conditions to export its oil at the world price. It's quite amazing, given that Americans are our best friend, our only neighbors and our best friends, that we still couldn't persuade them to take pipelines out of Canada. Well, there's ways around it, but anyways. Okay, so we have these four factors that we use to analyze whether or not our domestic companies will be successful in the international field. And the second factor are so-called demand conditions. Demand conditions. So first we have factor conditions, then we have demand conditions. And demand conditions mean you have a large enough domestic marketplace that effectively provides a training ground for your domestic companies. And so they kind of get experience marketing domestically, and once they have that experience, successful experience, then they transplant that experience going overseas. And some good examples of companies that have sort of been trained up in their domestic market before they move overseas is the electronic products industry in Japan. And another good example from Canada is the telecommunications industry in Canada. As we know, Canada is a very large country geographically, and over the years, Canada has been a leader in telecommunications because we've developed a lot of communication satellites, and that's kind of allowed us to leapfrog other countries. So therefore, Canada has technology developed for its domestic market that it's then able to export overseas. Okay, then the third factor is that explains whether or not domestic companies will be successful when they go into international markets, is the presence of related and support industries. Because if your economy does not have these sort of supplier clusters, then you don't have enough internal capabilities to help support your exports when they go overseas. And then the final factor is the intensity of the competition or the rivalry in the domestic market. So if we get accustomed to intense economic competition in our domestic market, then we'll be more prepared to deal with intense competition in foreign markets. Okay, so that's Porter's diamond of national competitive advantage. Okay, so next we have major trends that we've seen in recent years that have contributed to the evolution of global marketing. And so we have four trends here. Oops. Okay, so the first of these trends is a decline in economic protectionism. First is a decline in economic protectionism. Secondly, we have an increase in international integration across national boundaries. Thirdly, we have increasing global competition by global companies for global customers. And fourthly, we have the increasing use of the internet for commercial purposes. So the first of these factors is the decline in economic protectionism. And in the post-World War II period in countries around the world, countries have been reducing their forms of economic protectionism. In the immediate post-war period, there was an organization called GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, and GATT aspired to reduce tariffs, import tariffs on international trade. And then in 1995, the GATT was replaced by the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, and the World Trade Organization concerned itself not only with tariffs, but also with eliminating quotas and eliminating quality standards, different quality standards between countries that were being used to inhibit trade. And the World Trade Organization also set up trading rules and a mechanism for resolving trade disputes. So when we talk about economic protectionism, we mean the presence of either tariffs or quotas. Usually that's what we mean. And tariffs are taxes on imports. So if a country wants to protect its domestic industry from imports, traditionally it would impose tariffs to increase the price of the imported goods and to make the imported goods less attractive to domestic buyers and domestic goods. And then quotas are limits on the volume of products that can be imported. And we have a little diagram here which illustrates how trade protectionism hurts international trade. Oops, wrong way, sorry. Okay, so we have two types of protectionist measures. We have tariffs and we have quotas. So if we have if Canada imposes tariffs on imported cheese, that tariff increases the prices of foreign cheese that Canadians have to buy. And if foreign cheese is more expensive, then we buy less foreign cheese. Therefore, there's a decrease in world trade. And likewise, quotas have the same kind of effect. Quotas are restrictions on the quantity of foreign cheese that we can import, so it limits the supply, and that in turn reduces the level of international trade as well. So protectionism hurts that trade feedback effect that we spoke of earlier. So the book gives us some examples of some protectionist policies around the world. So I have a couple of examples. Oh, so we have the examples from the book of the European Union has a tariff on Japanese vehicles imported into Europe. I suspect what that does at the end of the day, it probably motivates the Japanese to put production facilities in Europe, but at least so the Europeans still buy Japanese vehicles, but I guess the Europeans get the jobs then. Another example from the book is Japan imposing tariffs on imported rice that costs the Japanese consumers about $8 billion more. I don't know if that's $8 billion per year than if there was free trade in rice. And then another example that I have, it comes from Canada, because Canada is quite notorious in the world for this. Canada is notorious for protecting certain agricultural sectors, the milk sector and the egg sector, for example. We don't like to have those imports of those kind of products into our country. because it hurts our farmers. That's what our politicians say. Uh, oops. So here's a comparison of some countries. So have Canadians impose tariffs. This is a couple years old, but Canadians impose dairy products in Canada, uh, or imported dairy products face a tariff. Imported dairy products face a tariff of about 250%, whereas the tariff on imported dairy products in Australia and New Zealand, Chile is about 4%. So ours is about 50 times higher than what it is in some of these other countries. And at the end of the day, Canadians pay about 50% more for our milk than the average price in OECD countries. So OECD, Organization of Economic Development, these are the developed countries in the world, the top developed countries in the world. Can't remember exactly what OECD stands for, but it's not the developing countries, it's the developed countries. Okay, so oops. Okay, back to the trends that we've seen in recent decades that affect global marketing. So we have an increase in economic integration across national boundaries. So one of the famous examples of this is in Europe. We have the European Union. European Union is comprised of 28 countries. I think the book says 27, but I think the book is a little bit dated. There's 28 countries that are part of an economic union, which means there's free trade between these 28 countries and their products. And we also know that 16 of these countries also share a common currency known as the euro. But of course, countries like England and Sweden are not part of the euro. Okay, and then another trade pact that we Canadians are most familiar with is the NAFTA free trade agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico. And so the European Union has about 500 million people in it, and the NAFTA agreement has about 450 million people in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And then there's some other free trade agreements around the world. In Asia, there's ASEAN, which is a free trade agreement between Southeast Asian countries. And then there's Mercosur in South America. And then I have a list here of the free trade agreements that Canada has negotiated. Not all of them are in effect quite today, but they're ones we've negotiated with other countries. So here's our list. So Canada has a free trade agreement with South Korea. It came into effect on January 1st, 2015. Honduras, Panama, Jordan, Colombia, Peru. These are all small countries, obviously. Costa Rica, Chile, Israel. And then the big one that we're most familiar with is North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, came into effect in 1994. And then prior to NAFTA, there was a free trade agreement between just Canada and the United States, and then in 1994, Mexico joined it. And then in recent time, Canada's been involved in some free trade agreements that have been negotiated. They've been concluded, but they're not in effect as of today. So the big one, or until about a year ago, the big one was the one with Europe, with the European Union. And so that was negotiated in, negotiations finished in mid-2014. And then the big one that concluded in the end of 2015 is the Trans-Pacific Partnership with 12 countries in the Pacific Rim. And I've got the map of that one here. It's not in effect as of today, but it's coming. Okay, so it's this map is from the American perspective, but there's Canada, the United States, Mexico, Peru, Chile, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Japan. Okay, and then the other one we mentioned that was negotiated in 2014, or the negotiations concluded in 2014. These trade deals take many years to negotiate. Is the one with European Union, and it's known as CETA. CETA? Yeah, CETA. So the EU Canadian Trade Agreement. I don't know what Canadian European Trade Agreement, I guess is what it stands for. Okay. So Canada is big on these free trade agreements around the world, or with countries around the world. And then there's a number of other free trade agreements that are still in the negotiation stage. So Canada's trying to negotiate one with the Caribbean countries, with some of the Central Latin American countries, India, Japan. Maybe that one's going to be replaced by Trans-Pacific Trade, Singapore. And then there's exploratory discussions with some other countries as well. Anyways, Canada's kind of big on these free trade agreements. And it's because, as we said before, foreign trade is a big part of our economy. About 30% of the value of our GDP gets exported every year. So it's a big number. Lots of Canadian jobs are dependent on trade, international trade. Okay. So the third trend that we've seen in recent decades that affects marketing is the rise of global competition amongst global companies for global customers. And global competition is simply companies that develop, produce, and market their products throughout the world. Sometimes companies market internationally through some sort of a strategic alliance, and it's different companies working together for a common a business goal. And we have three different flavors of global companies. I'm kind of missing one here. So the first flavor is a so-called international company. So international companies, they market existing products in foreign countries the same way they market the product in their home country. And so international marketing is really just an extension of domestic marketing. So we see this lots in between Canada and the United States. Tim Hortons expands down in the United States. Why? Because they say Americans are similar to Canadians. They know how to sell coffee and donuts to Canadians, so they figure they can sell the same, market the same products down there. And Americans, of course, do the same thing to Canadians. Coke and Pepsi come into Canada. Why? Because we're like Americans, and they can use the same. They can use Canada as kind of an extension of their domestic market. And then we have multinational companies, multinational companies. This is our second type of global company. So a multinational company uses what's known as a multi-domestic marketing strategy. So it sees different countries having different national markets, and so it markets its products a little bit differently in each country. And so the company might use different brand names in different countries. It might have some different product features in different countries, and it might have some different advertising programs in different countries. So a bit of an example of this is Starbucks. Starbucks expanded into Canada a couple of years back, and when they came into Canada, they realized that Canadians, they like Tim Hortons coffee, and Tim Hortons coffee has a weaker taste than Starbucks traditional coffee. So when Starbucks came into Canada, they developed a special coffee blend, coffee roast, for the Canadian market that wasn't as strong tasting as the American blend, and they called it what do they call it? Oh, they called it the blonde roast. The blonde roast, a little bit of a lighter taste. So that's an example of Starbucks using a multinational marketing strategy in Canada. Okay, then the third type of global company we have is a so-called transnational company. Transnational company. So transnational companies, they see the world as one big market, and they kind of emphasize cultural similarities um, between countries. So they kind of market the same product in a similar fashion across the different countries. So it's different than international marketing because it's not saying that foreigners are like domestic people. They're just saying that there's something in common between domestic people and all these different foreigners. Okay, so we have this concept of a global brand. So global brands are brands marketed under the same name in different countries with similar centrally planned marketing programs. And so that's good examples of global brands are the soft drink companies, fast food companies, vehicle companies. And when we talk about global consumers, um, it's companies recognizing that consumers in different countries have similar product needs. And we'll come back to this a little bit later, but there's there's a growing middle class in developing countries around the world, and some companies know what sells to the middle class in one country. So when they see the middle class, the number of people in the middle class in other countries growing, they they know what appeals to that middle class, and then they can sell to that middle class based on their experiences in the original countries. Okay, then the final uh, trend that we've seen in recent decades that affects global marketing is the increasing presence or increasing use of the internet for marketing purposes. So I have a slide here that will kind of illustrate this to you. Oh, here it is here. So these stats are from mid or end of 2015. So this chart shows the percentage of people in different parts of the world that have access to the internet. So at the end of, pretty well at the end of 2015, about 46% of the world's population had access to the internet. And that figure, 46%, is over 800% higher than it was 15 years ago. So between between the year 2000 and the year 2015, internet access has grown in excess of 800% in total, but still only about 46% of the world, so less than half the world, has access to the internet today. And when we compare these different regions of the world, we see that there's different parts of the world have different um, levels of access to the internet. So that's the penetration rate. So in North America, about 88% of the population has access to the internet. In South Pacific, so Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore, or Philippines, it's about 73%. In Europe, it's also about 73%. But there's some parts of the world where internet is still not very prevalent. So in Africa, only about 29% of the population has access to the internet. In Asia as a whole, so it's a pretty big part of the world, only about 40% of the population has access to the internet. And in the Middle East, it's just over half. So we can see that there's still increasing adoption of internet technology, and we know that more and more commerce is getting conducted over the internet as opposed to people buying products in bricks and mortar stores. And so we can see that as time goes on here, at least internationally, there should be more commerce getting conducted over the internet. And of course, that means an increase in international trade as well, because of course we can buy stuff from foreign countries over the internet. In fact, a couple of years ago, I bought a computer program from a company in Australia. I just I gave my credit card and downloaded it, and it was downloaded in just a couple seconds. Okay, so back we go. Oops. Okay, so those are the oops, that's the end of our trends. Okay, so if we're a company that and we want to expand our sales internationally, we know that when we market locally, we conduct an environmental scan. We check out the status of changes in society, the economy, government regulation, competitive level of competition between companies, and changes in technology. So likewise, if we're going to expand our sales internationally, we're going to engage in a world or a global environmental scan. So when we're looking at expanding into different countries, we're going to check out how their culture differs from ours. So cross-cultural analysis, I don't like pink, sorry. So cross-cultural analysis, it's a study of the similarities and differences between consumers in different countries based on differences in values, differences in customs, and differences in cultural symbols. So differences in values, so these are some soft concepts. They're a little bit hard to define. The book defines values as lasting, personal, socially preferred forms of behavior. And an example of difference in values provided by the authors of the book is in India, when McDonald's sells burgers, it doesn't sell beef hamburgers, it sells lamb burgers. Because they generally don't eat beef in India. They're Hindus. Okay, and then certainly countries have different customs, so different norms about how people do things within a country. So, in Canada, we drive on the right-hand side of the road. That's our custom. But in England and in Japan, the custom is to drive on the left-hand side of the road. I don't know why we're different, but we are. So another difference in customs we saw earlier in a few weeks back. In Canada and the United States, at Christmas, it's our custom to eat turkey, whereas in Japan, their custom is to eat KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, at Christmas. And another difference between Canadian and American customs is Canadians, by custom, the Canadian Thanksgiving is the third Monday of October, and in the United States, the custom for Thanksgiving is the last Thursday of November. So even Canadians and Americans have different customs regarding Thanksgiving. Both have Thanksgiving, just custom has it at different times. Okay, and then we know that countries have different national symbols. So symbol of Canada is the beaver, symbol of France is the Eiffel Tower, symbol of the United States is the bald eagle. And as we would intuit, the best language for communicating our marketing communications in is the language of the target customers. And a way to avoid some translation problems is to use back translation. So you use one translator to translate your marketing material into the foreign language, and then you use a different translator to translate the first translated message back to make sure that just to double check to make sure that the translation worked. Okay, so the authors make a mention of this concept of cultural ethnocentricity. So it's the belief that our culture is superior to others, and then there's an economic version of cultural ethnocentricity known as consumer ethnocentricity, or consumer ethnocentrism, which means that we believe that domestic products are superior to foreign products, or that foreign products are inferior to domestic products. And we see this sometimes in these so-called buy local campaigns. And then the book doesn't mention it, but there's the opposite of this. Instead of thinking that our domestic products are superior to foreign products, which is cultural ethnocentrism or consumer ethnocentrism, there's also the opposite. And the opposite is called consumer xenophilia. Xeno means foreign, and philia means love of, and it's a desire for. It's sometimes we want foreign things just because they're foreign, and we see this all the time. If we pay attention to it, we see it all the time. In foreign food, foreigners have many foreign countries have a love of American fast food. And this is a form of xenophilia. So McDonald's, for example, they have over 18,000 international restaurants. Obviously, foreigners, non-Americans, love American food. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 18,000 of these restaurants. And of course, KFC is the second biggest American fast food restaurant overseas, so they've got about 12,000 international restaurants. And who else do we have here? I'm only going into the top 5. KFC. Oh, Subway restaurant. Subway is actually the biggest food franchise in the world, but they have 10,000 international restaurants. And then we have Pizza Hut, so they've got about 6,000 foreign restaurants. And then finally, in the top 5, we have Starbucks, the American coffee shop. So about 5,700 foreign operations. So this is an example of xenophilia. It's the sense that foreign products, or in this case American products, are superior to the domestic products. Okay, let's move back. Oops. Okay. Oops. Oh, okay. So we can sort of figure this one out intuitively. If a country has some sensitivities about some national symbols, then we want to market in that country, we should not abuse their national symbols. And I think Coke turned the pillars of the Parthenon into Coke bottles, and the Greeks were offended by that. Okay. So if we wanted to expand our operations, expand our sales internationally, and we engage in a global environmental scan, one of the factors we're going to look at are the economic factors, or a number of economic factors that affect sales in the prospective importing country. So one thing that we look at is looking at the stage of economic development of the particular country. So we kind of have 3 types of countries. We have the economically developed countries, So this is the first world countries: Canada, the United States, England, Australia, Japan. Then we have developing countries. So these are countries that are not quite as affluent as the developed countries, but they're getting there. So this is the Chinas of the world, the Indies of the world. And then we have the book calls them the bottom of the pyramid, which are countries that are still poor. And the book mentions that 86% of the world's population is in the developing class, and that doesn't make sense. This developing 86% must be in both the developing and the bottom of the pyramid, if that's 4 billion people. And at the bottom of the pyramid group, they earn less than $2 American per day. Okay, so likewise, if we're wanting to expand our sales into a foreign country, we need to be aware of the state of their economic infrastructure. So we need to understand what the state of their electrical distribution system is, what their transportation network is like, their railway or roads and highways, airports, the state of their communication system, the state of their financial markets, the state of their banking systems, and the state of their legal system. Because if, no doubt, not all countries have first world um, economic infrastructure that makes doing business more challenging. Okay, then another factor we're going to be interested in when we want to expand into a foreign country is the level of consumer income and the purchasing power of the residents. Obviously, we're interested in the level of consumer income because if it's a poor country, then they don't have a lot of money, and so they might not be able to buy our product. And mentioned earlier that there's this tremendous growth in the size of the middle class throughout the world. There's this growth that's happening right now. So if we're selling products that appeals to the middle class in our country, then maybe that will also appeal to the middle class in foreign countries as well. And if the middle class is growing around the world, then maybe there are some good growth opportunities in foreign markets. So I have some stats here, or some figures here about that. Okay, I'm skipping a bit here, but so here's a forecast in the growth in the size of the middle class throughout the world. So here we are, 2015, 2016. World's population is just over 7 billion, and the world's population 15 years from now is forecast to be about 8 billion people. And the middle class today around the world is somewhere about, I don't know, 2.7 billion people. And by the year 15 years from now, it's forecast to be just in excess of 5 billion people. So we can see that there's a forecast here that the size of the middle class throughout the world, it's forecast to almost double in the next 15 years. So if our products appeal to the middle class, then we see some growth opportunities in other parts of the world. So here in 2009, the middle class throughout the world totaled 1.8 billion people. In 2020, or forecast in 2020, it'll be 3.2 billion people. And in 2030, 4.9 billion. And you'll notice that the big growth comes from the Asian Pacific area. So in 2009, there were about 500 million middle-class people in Asia Pacific. And by 2030, that's forecast to be in excess of 3 billion people. So tremendous growth there. And the size of the middle class in North America is really not, is just stagnant, or forecast to be stagnant. Likewise in Europe, it's forecast to be relatively stagnant. But there's big forecast growth in Asia, and of course Middle East as well, and Northern Africa, 100 million up to 230 million. Okay, so we're concerned about, if we want to expand overseas, we're concerned about the level of income in consumer income in those markets. Okay, so the book talks a little bit about microfinance, and it talks about microfinance in kind of a general sense. But microfinance is lenders providing small amounts of business capital to borrowers in poor countries. And the mere access to even small amounts of capital enable those poor people to increase their standards of living and give themselves higher levels of consumer income. So this whole microfinance movement started in Bangladesh a number of years ago, and I suspect some students are familiar with this. So it started with a company in Bangladesh. So here's Bangladesh. Where is Bangladesh? Well, it's in the northeast east corner of India. So here's the Bay of Bengal, otherwise known as the part of the Indian Ocean, and there's Bangladesh surrounded by India. And Bangladesh is a poor country. And I don't even know what year it started. But a bank started in Bangladesh. It's known as the Grameen Bank. And the Grameen Bank lends small amounts of money to poor people to help them develop their standards of living. And by small amounts of money, they mean, 150 to $100. And that doesn't sound like much, but if you're in a poor country and you're only living off $2 per day, then that's a significant amount of money, and it may be enough for you to start your own business and improve your economic welfare. So these stats are a little bit out of date here, but this is lending per year from the Grameen Bank, and the stats only go up to 2005, but we can see that by 2005, lending was up to about $500 million per year, so that's about $500 million per year. And of course, if it goes out in amounts of 50 to 150 bucks, we can tell that it's helping a large number of people. Okay, then a final economic factor that we'll be interested in when we're wanting to export or wanting to expand into foreign markets is going to be the foreign exchange rate, because that's going to affect what people are going to be able to buy. And then a non-economic factor, but again part of our environmental scan is the regulatory factor. So it's government regulation and level of political stability, because we know that political instability in a country scares away foreign investors. And we do have some politically unstable regimes around the world. We have the North Koreas of the world, we have the Syrias of the world. Iranians are seem to be coming back on side, but Iran's been a bit of a wobbly country for a few years as well. Okay. Let's just move on. Okay, so if we want to sell our products overseas, how might we do that? What options do we have for doing that? So we have four options: exporting, licensing, entering into a joint venture agreement with a foreign company, or directly investing in the foreign country. So when you speak about exporting, so exporting is producing the goods in our home country, but selling the product in another country. And we have two versions. One, we have direct exporting. So we produce the products domestically, and then we export the products to the foreign country without making use of a middleman or distributor in the foreign country. And then we have indirect exporting. So we produce the products domestically, but then we hire a distributor in the foreign country to distribute the product for us. And we can tell intuitively that there's going to be less investment risk for us if we make use of if we use indirect exporting, because we sell the product earlier and someone else bears the risk in the foreign country. Okay, so we have a little bit of a diagram on this next page. We'll go through all these, but we have a little bit of a diagram of this on the next page. Okay, so the second route for selling overseas is through licensing. And with licensing, we use some form of intellectual property, otherwise known as IP. We license or sell some form of intellectual property. So that could be a trademark, it could be a patent, it could be a copyright. And so we might license a foreign company to use our brand name overseas. So on this little chart here, we have it's a chart of the level of risk. It's the level of investment risk on the x-axis, so least amount, most amount, and we have profit potential on the y-axis. So when we look at how much investment risk, what's the investment risk profit potential trade-off between these various forms of foreign operations, we see that exporting is it provides the least amount of investment risk because we invest our money in our capital back home and we simply export the product. And so there's low level of risk, therefore profit potential is also low. With licensing, there's a bit more risk to the company because some of the control over your brand, some of the control over your licensed product is out of your hands. So there's higher risk with licensing, but somewhat higher profit potential. When you talk about a joint venture, so a joint venture is where one company teams up with another company in the foreign market to manufacture and sell the products in that foreign market. So there's more investment risk for the domestic company because you're actually investing something overseas, and corresponding to that increasing level of investment risk is slightly higher profit potential. And then the final approach to selling overseas is to direct or invest in your own production facilities overseas, and so you have a lot more investment risk at stake, but then you control the whole show, and your profit potential is higher there. So I have some examples. So I have an example of a joint venture. I don't know when this joint venture started, but it's a recent news announcement by a joint venture that the snowmobile company, Bombardier has in Russia. There we go. So this is from August 2015. So Bombardier is the Montreal-based transportation equipment manufacturer. They have a joint venture in Russia producing locomotives for the railway system over there. And they came up with a new logo for a new train. This train works at temperatures ranging from, must be going to Siberia, from -55 up to +45. Anyways, just an example of a joint venture. Okay, so a positive thing about a joint venture is you're sharing the investment risk with another party. A drawback is if you get into a disagreement, well, now you have to try to find a way to resolve it. And if you own the entire investment, well, you can solve your problems yourself. But if you have a partner, it's always more challenging to resolve disputes when there's a partner involved. Okay, then the final form of way of expanding sales into international markets is through direct investing. So this is where a domestic company sets up a subsidiary overseas and directly invests in the production facilities overseas. And so a positive thing about that is the company maintains control, it has higher profit potential. The drawback of that kind of thing is you have more money at risk, and sometimes, in some countries, there's a risk of government expropriation of your company. And so here's an example of a Canadian company. It was a gold mine that built a gold mine down in Venezuela. And then the Venezuelan government decided to nationalize all the gold mines in the country. So here was this Canadian company that built this mine. I don't know how much they must have invested uh, several $100 million, and then it was kind of stolen from them, from the Venezuelan government. And so this Canadian gold company, Gold Reserve, they took the Venezuelan government to court, and they won an award of $750 million, 750 million American dollars as compensation. And then Exxon Mobil, the American oil and gas company, also had some property expropriated by the Americans, and so Exxon Mobil also sued the Venezuelan government, and they also won an award of worth $1.6 billion for the expropriated mine, or for the expropriated properties, I should say. So a drawback, certainly in some countries, a drawback, a weakness of direct investment is, hey, if you're in some kind of nut bar country like Venezuela, where the government likes to nationalize, or has a habit of nationalizing foreign businesses, well, you could lose all your money unless you can successfully sue them in international trade court. Okay, let's just move on. Oops. Okay. So we said that one form of expanding international markets is through licensing, and one form of licensing is franchising. And we know that many of the American fast food restaurants use franchising as a market entry strategy. So I have some figures here, some recent figures on some of the big companies of the world that use franchising. So the first ones are some of the American fast food companies, or these are American companies, they're not all fast food. So big global franchises in 2015. So Subway restaurant, I don't have the actual figures here, there's rank. McDonald's makes big use of franchising for overseas sales, KFC, Burger King, 7-Eleven, so that's a convenience store. There's lots of 7-Elevens in Japan. Hertz Rent-A-Car, Pizza Hut, Ace. I think Ace is a hardware store. The Wyndham Hotel Group, so it's a hotel chain. And this is a French company. Group Casino. Okay, haven't heard of them. So most of the big franchise countries or companies throughout the world are American, but there are some non-American franchises as well. And there's our French Group Casino, Carrefour's another French food store. And here's Tim Hortons from Canada. They have lots of stores in the United States and also in the Middle East. Europcar, Schumann, I think it's a private math school. H&R Block. Yogen Fruz is a frozen yogurt company from Canada that's also expanded overseas through franchising. Okay, so the final section deals with the developing marketing programs. For overseas international sales. So we have 5 promotional strategies for expanding into international markets, and I'm just going to move on to the next slide because it all corresponds to this little matrix. It all corresponds to this little matrix. So we can devise a bit of a matrix here. On our x-axis we have we look at product features, and on the y-axis we have promotional features. So one way of expanding or developing our promotion strategy going into foreign markets is to market the same product that we market domestically with the same promotion, and that's known as a product extension strategy. So that works best when the cultures of the two countries are the same. So a lot of American advertising also works in Canada because we have the same product, we speak the same language, and so the same promotion works here as well. And then another marketing strategy is to take the same product but to adapt the promotional material in the foreign country. So it's a communication adaptation strategy. Same product with modified promotion. And the example from the book for this is L'Oreal, the cosmetic company that sells the same sunscreen in Northern Europe and Southern Europe, but it markets it as sunscreen or markets it as skin protection in Northern Europe, but as a beauty product in Southern Europe. But it's the same product. It's the identical product. It's just marketed differently. Okay, and then another variation is to adapt the product, but use the same promotion in different countries. So modified product, but same promotion. Example of that. So this is known as a product adaptation strategy. And the example, or an example from the book about this is like Gerber baby food having different product flavors in different countries, but promoting the product essentially the same way. And the second example from the book is Maybelline, the makeup company. So they modify their product to suit different skin types in different markets, but essentially they market the product the same way in different countries. And then the fourth strategy is the so-called dual adaptation strategy. So you modify both the product and the promotion strategy in different countries. And an example from the book is Nescafe coffee. They have different flavors of coffee in different markets, and they market the coffee differently in those different countries. And then the final approach is to just invent a new product, and you can either use, well, you're inventing new products, so you're going to have to develop a new marketing strategy. And an example from the book is Whirlpool changing the features of their appliances to suit the homes that they'll be in different countries. In some countries, they have small living quarters, and their washing machines sit in the living room. And so Whirlpool makes the colors of their appliances fancier, so they'll look better in their living room. Okay. So the final couple of topics for this section. So I'm going to look at the second one first. I think there's a bit of a mistake here on the slide. Anyways, so if we're going to market our products in foreign countries, remember we're going to develop a marketing program based on the 4 Ps, which is known as the marketing mix. So price, product, promotion, and place. And so price is part of the marketing mix. Price is one of the 4 Ps. And so if we're going to market our product in a foreign country, we have to have a suitable pricing strategy. So the book talks about some angles to pricing strategies. If we price too low, then we might get accused of dumping. And dumping is where we sell a product in a foreign country below our original production costs. And the reason some companies might want to do that is they may have excess inventory in the domestic market, can't sell the product domestically, so they just want to get rid of it, get their money out of their inventory, and so they dump it overseas at any price they can get. But dumping, if a company is proven to be engaging in dumping, then that country can impose import duties to offset the artificially low price. And then, of course, we can have the opposite thing happen. If we set our price too high, then we might encounter something known as a gray market. So a gray market is a legitimate product getting sold through unauthorized channels. So let's say we're in the Canadian market, or the American market, the North American market, and we have a piece of equipment that's designed for the domestic market. It suits the safety standards of the domestic market. But let's say we have another altered version of the same product that we want to sell overseas. But the overseas market doesn't have as stringent warranty requirements, doesn't have as stringent safety requirements. And so the product that gets sold overseas, the version of the product that gets sold overseas, it's less expensive than the product that we make domestically. So the gray market is where this product that's designed for foreign markets actually comes back into the domestic market through unauthorized distribution channels, and it sells at a lower price than the product designed for the domestic market. Anyways, that's what a gray market is, and it could be we could encounter it if we charge too much in our domestic market for our products, or if we charge too much overseas and we have a cheap product domestically, then maybe some of our domestic product can make it overseas as well. Okay, and then finally, if we're going to be marketing our product overseas, we're also going to have a distribution strategy. Oops, wrong way. Okay, we're also going to have a distribution strategy. That takes into consideration the different economic infrastructure or customs that might be present in those foreign countries. So if we're marketing a product to a developing country and they don't have as reliable an electrical distribution system or communication system or a road system, then if we're selling a perishable food product, then maybe we need to find ways to protect our food as it makes its way through the distribution system so it doesn't spoil en route. So we need to take the economic infrastructure of the foreign country into consideration when we're planning how to distribute our product, and the level of the economic infrastructure in a country is going to be dependent on what stage the country's at in economic development. And if we're selling products overseas, we have a longer distribution chain than we'll have domestically, and there's just more places where something can go wrong in the distribution system. So instead of just selling in the domestic market, if we want to go internationally, we have more parties involved. We have the seller, we have the original seller. They might have a marketing branch outside the country. We might have, so we're going to have some sort of transportation system between the two different countries. Maybe we're distributing our product by ship, and so we're going to send stuff overseas. And if we're shipping our product, we have the added complexity of which party takes the risk when the goods are in transit. Is it going to be the vendor? Is it going to be the buyer? Or is it going to be like an agent that takes custody during the transit? And then once our product makes it to the foreign country, then we have to contend with the different distribution channels in that country. And then consumers in the country can also have different buying customs and buying habits. So if we're going to distribute internationally, there's more pieces to the distribution chain where something can go wrong. And that makes the distribution more complex than in a non-exporting or non-foreign sales situation. Okay, so that's it for Chapter 7. And we'll see you back in Chapter 8.